The National Day of Prayer program was well attended by young and old. The mayor of Pleasant Valley and the school principal led in praying for our leaders, and there was a special number on the piano by Mrs. Dodge, the music teacher. Finally, it was time for Becky and Jonathan and the other children to stand on stage and present the spoken and written words of famous Americans.
Hello, my name is Abigail Adams. My husband, you know, John, he's the second president of these United States. He's a good and honest man, a God-fearing man who prays every day for this young country of ours. And that's important, because a patriot without religion, in my opinion, is as great a paradox as an honest man without the fear of God. Don't you all agree?
Hello, my name is Abraham Lincoln. You know, my campaign poster called me Honest Abe, and that's what I aim to be. But I've got to tell you, being the 16th president of this great nation is pretty hard right now. You see, we're in the midst of a great struggle between the North and the South. Recently, I had a visitor in my office, a minister from one of the churches here in Washington, and he said he hoped the Lord was on our side. Well, that got me thinking, and I turned to him and said, I am not at all concerned about that, for I know that the Lord is always on the side of right. Then I thought a moment more and said, but it is my constant anxiety and prayer that I and this nation should be on the Lord's side. And I believe that's exactly what we should all be praying for today.
The program was a big success, and everyone seemed to agree that it would be good to do it again on the next National Day of Prayer. To celebrate their performance, Jonathan and Becky's parents took them home and had ice cream sundaes.
I have to say you both did very well tonight.
Yes, you did. It was a wonderful program.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
I liked when the children were dressed like famous Americans and quoted them. I didn't realize President Harry Truman said, all of us, at home, at war, wherever we may be, are within the reach of God's love and power. We all can pray. We all should pray.
Oh, yes. And I liked Robert E. Lee saying, let there be prayer at sunup, at noonday, at sundown, at midnight, all through the day.
I guess prayer is pretty important, isn't it, Mom?
It sure is. That's how I like to start my day, with a time of prayer.
Oh, Mom, I heard a great story from my Sunday school teacher. Back in the early days of this country, a stranger went to the Congress one day and asked a man how he could recognize George Washington. The man said, you can do that very easily. When Congress goes to prayer, Mr. Washington, he's the gentleman who kneels.
I like that story. It shows that a tradition of prayer for the nation goes all the way back to President Washington.
In my social studies class, I learned that President Dwight Eisenhower began declaring a National Day of Prayer each year starting in 1952.
Oh, yes. There was an article in the newspaper about that. And it quoted President Eisenhower as once telling members of Congress that prayer is simply a necessity. If we back away from our problems and seek guidance in prayer, the problems fall back into proper focus.
That works not only for government, but for families, too.
And for kids.
Right, for kids, too.
Oh, no!
What's wrong?
I just remembered. I've got a social studies test tomorrow.
Well, from what I've been hearing from you today, you're ready for it.
Yeah, besides, you can always pray about it, Becky. Right, Dad?
That's what God tells us in the Bible. Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7 says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, including social studies tests, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace that passes all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus.
Thanks, Dad. I'd like some peace about that test right now. We started the day with prayer. Now I think we should end it with prayer, too.
That sounds good to me. Let's do that right now.
It's time to pray to the God who watches for us. It's time to seek His face without delay. The world is dark, for the clouds of war still threaten. It's time for all America to
That song said it's time for all America to pray. You want to know something? I'd like to change that to it's time for all the nations of the world to pray. Psalm 33:12 says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people He chose for His inheritance." If that's true, and I believe it is, then we could also say, "Cursed is the nation whose God is not the Lord." The way things are going here in the United States of America, taking God out of our public life, out of our public schools, it's hard for me to see why God would bless our nation, except for the prayers of His people. 2 Chronicles 7:14 tells us, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, will forgive their sins, and heal their land." You've been listening to Storytime, a listener-supported production of CBH Ministries in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Bye now. Broadcasting of the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago presents Chapter 1 of Helga Skogsberg's Comes the Day, Comes Away, the story of Swedish immigrants who homesteaded in America along the wilderness shores of Lake Superior.